What is going on, everybody? Josh here. Just wanted to take 2 seconds to introduce the guest I'm having on the platform today. It's our third podcast guest. This is going to be a very interesting discussion regarding the science of grounding with Rob from The Grounded Athlete. Rob has been into grounding for over 5 years, and his business, The Grounded Athlete, creates custom-made leather grounding sandals. You're going to hear Rob and I talk about the science of grounding, the physiological effects, oxidative stress, cortisol secretion, muscle tone, vagal tone, heart rate variability even. It's a really interesting discussion. There's a lot of science in there for those of you who are interested. And we even talk about some of the theories that Rob is pursuing with regard to grounding and water in the human body. So very interesting discussion. I hope you guys enjoy, and I'll see you on the other side. What is going on, everybody? It's Josh here, Rise Above Health. And we got a special guest for arguably our third podcast on the platform, third guest. And we have here today Rob, who runs and owns The Grounded Athlete. The Grounded Athlete is a platform and a product where Rob creates these specialized grounded sandals, and it discusses and talks about all about the science of grounding, how it impacts your physiology, your sleep, lower stress levels, cortisol, all of those fantastic things. And he's really putting something new out into the internet ether with his content. So very happy to have Rob on today. We've been trying to do this for a while, and finally got him here for you guys. So Rob, why don't you just introduce yourself and who you are, and how you got into grounding?
Absolutely. First of all, thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Rob. I started The Grounded Athlete around 2.5 years ago to spread awareness for this special practice we call grounding. And ever since then, I've just been making videos and making sandals to continue to spread awareness for something that can absolutely 100% help anybody and everybody, which is grounding.
And it's readily available, right?
Readily available, free 99.
Yeah, all you got to do is step outside.
Yep, yes, sir.
So talk a little bit about why grounding is beneficial and why you recommend it to people.
Well, so the body is very much electrical in nature, and it is unnatural to be disconnected from the earth. This alters how your body works on a very fundamental level. Your body is basically this big bag of redox reactions going on, these reduction oxidation actions going on all around the body. And it's basically just this dance of electrons going on in your body, electrons being moved around from one molecule to the next. And so when you insulate yourself from the earth, you're basically altering the electrical homeostasis of your body, which leads to a lot of bad things down the road, contributes to a lot of disease, a lot of pain, a lot of inflammation, a lot of the big one is oxidative stress. So when you ground, the big thing you're doing is you're helping your body efficiently fight off oxidative stress, which is intertwined with inflammation. And there's many, many more reasons beyond that, but that's the big one that people should probably keep in mind that's going to happen when you ground.
Gotcha. And that I assume they've done studies on this, EEG, things like that.
Yeah, there are plenty of studies out there that would demonstrate grounding's effect as far as inflammation goes. There's medical thermography. There's a lot of visual images.
What's that? Medical thermography?
So it's just picking up the heat in your body. When there's inflammation going on in any part of the body, it's gonna radiate more heat. And so that picks up the heat wherever that area is. And what they see in the people that are grounded is that heat goes down, which means the inflammation is going down, which is really cool. That's on my website, the medical thermography images on the research tab. So if you want to take a look at those images, they're really, really cool to look at. So that's a nice visual aspect to look at.
Does it tend to be like whole body, or is it in
So
specific places?
they do like a leg at a time, torso. They've done it in the face too. They've looked at how circulation in the face changes when you ground. So it's pretty interesting.
I would assume that would increase circulation.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Awesome. What are the main benefits? So it reduces oxidative stress. What is it? Superoxides and things like that. So reduces that, and what does that do for the body?
So your body is always producing these free radicals in popular terminology. These are reactive oxygen species, reactive nitrogen species, reactive chlorine species, and these are constantly being produced in the body as a normal part of cellular respiration, mitochondrial respiration, and production of ATP. Electron transport chain, it gets leaked out into the body. Even breathing, about 2% of the air that you breathe is going to get converted to superoxide anion, which a lot of these radicals come about from the reduction of molecular oxygen. So there's really no getting away from free radicals. They're very potent defense systems as well. When your body's fighting off pathogens and damage, trying to get rid of damaged cells, tumorous cells, the white blood cells, the immune cells, the phagocytes will basically flood these cells with these reactive oxygen, nitrogen, and chlorine species to quite literally rip them apart. So you can see how they can be useful in the immune system. But the problem is when they stick around too long. And so when a phagocyte is flooding a damaged cell or pathogen or something with these reactive species, it's going to create what's called an oxidative burst. And that's what happens when you're using a lot of oxygen to flood these damaged cells, these pathogens with these reactive species. What this does is it creates this inflammatory barricade around this inflammatory zone, and that's to keep the area contained.
Right.
In this inflammatory zone, that's what makes grounding a lot more potent than your enzymatic or non-enzymatic dietary antioxidants. So electrons conducted from the earth can semiconduct into these inflammatory zones. And that
What does
this
that mean in like layperson terms?
So these inflammatory zones are basically these walls of connective tissue. They contain the area. So a lot of the toxic byproducts in the inflammatory zone can't get out into the bloodstream. They can't, get all over the place where they're not supposed to be. And so when you step barefoot on the earth, electrons are going into your body. And so electrons can semiconduct through these proteins because proteins are semiconductors. And not a lot of people know that. It's part of what makes all the protein in your body in conjunction with water. It creates this big battery of water and hydrophilic proteins, which really deserves a podcast by itself because that's a very long, extensive mechanism that needs to be, time needs to be dedicated to that by itself. But electrons go into the body, they semiconduct across these proteins into the inflammatory zone. And that's the difference between conducted electrons from the earth, which I guess we didn't really touch on this. What are antioxidants? They're basically these molecules that can donate electrons to these reactive species because these reactive species are reactive because they're missing an electron in their outer shell. And so what they'll do is they'll go around the body and they'll strip electrons from other molecules. And when you strip an electron from another molecule, it's going to make that molecule reactive. And then so you have this chain reaction going on. And that's what leads to oxidative stress. Fighting oxidative stress is really, I think, key in alleviating a lot of chronic non-communicable disease.
Hmm.
And so you can do a search on PubMed right now, and you'll see what I'm talking about as far as the ubiquity of oxidative stress in pretty much every chronic disease.
Right.
You look up redox signaling and inflammation; they're intimately intertwined with every disease. And so, if we can attenuate that and moderate that a little bit through grounding, then we have a pretty good use for being barefoot. So.
Gotcha. So, and then with the antioxidants, right? So let's say we're eating berries or something, that's
Mhm.
gonna will digest that. Electrons will be donated to those reactive oxygen species, thereby stopping that cycle of electron stealing and reducing oxidative stress.
Yeah, so I think, going back to the inflammatory zone that we talked about, so dietary antioxidants can't seem to penetrate those areas. A lot of the research with antioxidants is actually not so great.
Hmm.
It even potentially makes the problem worse. Increases your chance your chances of getting cancer. And they call it the antioxidant paradox because you would think something like that, giving people more antioxidants would be a good thing, but
Right.
a lot of the clinical trials point the other direction.
Hmm.
And I'm thinking, and a lot of people that I've based my work on, and I've done my research on, uh, believe the same thing, that conducted electrons from the Earth mechanistically they're acting differently than dietary antioxidants like alpha tocopherol, vitamin E, carotenoids, beta carotene, polyphenols.
Hmm.
um, they like in a petri dish they work really really well, but once you introduce them into the body they don't seem to work as well. And there are a lot of factors that go into that as far as specificity, being able to target specific redox pathways, specific inflammatory pathways. But as of right now, the antioxidant clinical trials they're not so promising.
Interesting. Got it. So, what's the difference in behavior that enables them to get into that inflammatory zone?
Semiconduction. Um, the I'd say that's the biggest one. Electrons from the Earth can semiconduct more readily because they're free electrons. They can semiconduct through what I like to call the water protein matrix battery. And so I from everything that I've worked on thus far, I've kind of compiled uh, the the basic mechanistic actions that are happening when you ground. One is that it increases the density of negative charge in the body. Two, it increases your capacity to manage oxidative stress and thus inflammation. And three, it charges the water protein matrix battery. But that water protein matrix battery is a big reason that electrons from the Earth can semiconduct into these inflammatory zones or inflammatory pouches or granuloma pouches, which are pretty well documented, these inflammatory zones, but they're not talked about very often. Um,
Got
but mechanistically, the protein uh, the protein walls that surround these inflammatory zones, they're semiconducted by electrons from the Earth, free electrons.
it. Right. And so, just for folks that are watching and interested,
Mhm.
um, break it down into very simple terms. So, it semiconducts and is able to cross into the water protein matrix battery. Break that down into like, can you give it an analogy or?
Yeah, it's like quenching a fire. It's like electrons are the water going into an area that's on fire and putting out this fire. There's
Yeah.
a lot of inflammation and oxidative stress festering in these inflammatory zones, and they can fester for years.
Right.
And they so let's say you've got a splinter. You've got a splinter in your toe. Inflammation reaction going on in that area. And so it created an inflammatory zone. And
Right.
so that can end up like if it's not taken care of, it can end up festering for like years. And so what was
Right.
once like this very acute um, inflammatory event, it can
Right.
turn into something
It,
systemic down the road.
right.
It's very
Sort of like a positive feedback loop.
yeah,
Right.
it's
For
crazy.
inflammation and disease. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, it's
Uh,
electrons coming into a very fiery area and putting out the fire
right.
by
I
semi-conducting across proteins.
Yeah, I actually have a probably a personal example. Um, so obviously one way to ground is to step outside, right? And you're going to get those semiconductive electrons going into your body that way to lower inflammation.
Right.
What are your favorite ways to ground?
Well, I sleep grounded, so that's one of the biggest things I noticed with grounding is that my sleep is really, really good.
Nice.
And I use just a regular grounding mat for that. I put it underneath my pillow, so that's 8 or 9 hours out of the day that I'm grounded.
Hmm.
But my favorite way is just being outside in concrete, on grass, just barefoot. Um, and even in the winter, it's pretty much winter here now. It's 20, 25, 27 degrees. Even then, I'm outside barefoot for, segments of like 3 to 5 minutes.
Hmm.
I just, I like it. It does the grounding mats and all that. They don't really feel the same.
Yeah,
Um, Even though there is electronic activity going on, um, being outside barefoot is probably my favorite way to ground. Um, my absolute favorite way is to ground is to be in the ocean, but that's not exactly feasible in Iowa.
yeah. I've tried. I've tried both. I actually have a memory of there was like this one summer where I thought it would be a good idea not to wear shoes. It it just had a really specific quality to it, and I've also tried grounding mats, and it also didn't feel like kind of what you're describing. It
Yeah.
definitely works, but it doesn't feel quite the same.
I'm sure just like being outside, breathing fresh air, that probably plays into it too.
Yeah, endorphins and things like that. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So you'd like to step outside. So for the pillow, the mat that you put under your pillow, I assume you plugged into the to an outlet for that.
Right. Yep.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah. So
Um,
the third prong in your wall outlet is the ground port, and that is connected to the earth outside. And so that's how you can have something plugged in, be in contact with it, and be grounded indoors. For people that aren't familiar with the grounding mats or the grounding products, they make sheets and all that too, pillowcases. So,
Yeah, yeah, and they have that third prong is very important because it helps cut down electrical fires and
yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
sparks and things like that.
Yeah, in the electrical industry, grounding connection is very, very important.
Absolutely, yeah. Otherwise, we probably would have a much we would be much less successful in creating sustainable electrical systems without it.
Yes, yes.
Um, so pretty much every electrical outlet is. I mean, it has. I know there are some outlets that are made without it, but I don't know.
Yeah.
If they stop
So
making those.
if your home was built after the 70s, it's legally required. Like you have to have a grounding connection. But homes built before the 70s, a lot of them don't have that grounding port. You can also check. You can also check too with they make equipment that you can check to see if your home is actually grounded.
Um, and yeah, I think that's an interesting thing for people to be aware of that they might not be is that all of your outlets are grounded, and the reason for that is that it's the same exact process that we talk about with grounding itself. For you, when you put your feet on the ground, it's occurring with occurring with your outlets. Each of those outlets is tethered to presumably a rod that goes into the ground, right, in some capacity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of the studies that are done are, they kind of fashion their own grounding system. They put a rod outside the house, and they have a cord that connects to some patches that connect to the subjects. So I don't think any of them used the wall outlets though. But that's a way to do it if you're old fashioned and you want to be absolutely sure. So
Yeah, you can run a cable out like through a window or something and just
yeah,
stick it in the ground. Yeah.
yeah.
Um, I actually pulled up some. I did look at some studies myself, and we're not going to go through all of it, but I found some. I think it was let's say a review paper, and it
Mhm.
just kind of demonstrates some, let's say, normalizing some of the normalizing aspects of grounding on the physiology. And I thought we could just take a quick look, and you could give some commentary.
Okay.
Um, Let me just pull it up here. People that watch my channel know I like to pull up the notes. Um, so this was a pilot study that evaluated diurnal rhythms in cortisol and changes in sleep, pain, stress, things like anxiety, depression, irritability, monitored by subjective reporting. And they compared that to the cortisol secretion profile over 24 hours of those patients, or those participants. So you can see here on the left, you have, of that group, a general uh, profiling of their cortisol secretion. So, generally speaking, a lot of them are in the mid range of, I forget what the actual unit of measurement it is here, but a lot of them are in the mid range, and then you've got some outliers sort of at the top, up here with a massive production of cortisol. But over on the right, this is 24-hour secretion after grounding. And you can see there's much more normalization going on here of the cortisol levels. Everyone on the channel may know that cortisol is the wakefulness hormone, but it's also a stress hormone. So can be related to things like fight or flight, and if it's elevated for long enough periods, it can lead to inflammation and things like that. So what's your Rob? What's your commentary on this?
Yeah, so normal circadian cortisol secretions, they're going to be highest around 8 a.m., lowest
Right.
around midnight. A lot of these people that they use as subjects in the study, their cortisol profiles are kind of all over the place, as you can see in
Yeah.
those illustrations, and they definitely start to stabilize a bit more on the right there after grounding. And there's a lot of factors that play into why that's happening. But a big mechanistic action that happens when you ground is the parasympathetic nervous system gets stimulated pretty significantly. And I think that plays a lot into that non-stress response, that parasympathetic response. I think on the left there, you see a lot of sympathetically charged individuals. For people that don't know, the sympathetic, parasympathetic nervous are branches of the autonomic nervous system. Your sympathetic is more your stressful, your fight or flight nervous system, and you have your parasympathetic, which is kind of your rest and digest nervous system. And grounding has been shown in multiple different ways to stimulate that parasympathetic response and bring down that overcharged sympathetic branch.
Right. Thereby lowering cortisol,
Yeah.
or normalizing the secretions. Right.
Normalizing it. Yep.
Right. And specifically, what's the mechanism, if you happen to know?
Well, I think it could be multiple things, but I think stimulating the parasympathetic response, um, it you don't want to be pulled too much in one direction with your autonomic nervous system. You don't want to be pulled too much to the sympathetic side. You don't want to be pulled too much to the parasympathetic side. I think the
Right.
big thing with grounding is balance, finding balance in all of your bodily systems, especially your nervous system.
Hmm.
But grounding has been shown to stimulate parasympathetic activity through vagal tone, heart rate variability, EEG measurements, EMG measurements, and then yeah, I mean those are specific studies that looked at how grounding affects the nervous system, and we can talk a little bit about those if you want. But it could be a lot of different things happening at once.
Mhm.
I couldn't tie it to like one
Sure.
thing specifically.
Yeah.
But I know that grounding stimulates the vagus nerve,
Right.
um, improves vagal tone, it increases heart rate variability. If you have low heart rate variability, it means you're stressed. You're not coping with stress well, and
Right.
so grounding improves that. In EEG, in an EEG study, they looked at EEG, EMG. Grounding stimulated the brain, particularly the left hemisphere, which is more associated with parasympathetic activity. It also uh, helped with muscle tone too. They looked at EMG in the trapezius muscles, and so
Yeah.
usually when you're really stressed out, your shoulders tend to clench up. And so what they found in those EMG readings is that the tension went down, which further indicates that there's a relaxation effect going on. But I'm guessing it's most people are in this fight or flight state, this sympathetically charged state. And when you ground, it's bringing your body back down to a well balanced position between sympathetic and parasympathetic. But again, it could be a lot of different things. There's a lot of things that grounding does to the body physiologically, that I'm sure they all kind of tie into that.
Of course. Yeah, and that's a really great point actually. I'd say probably generally speaking, most cultures, but particularly in the West, there's definitely a huge problem with, let's say, sympathetic overdrive in the general population. People are stressed. They're generating excess levels of stress hormones, um, and I mean, I know my shoulders live up here. So when I'm working, I always have to remember to bring them back down. But, let's say chronic sympathetic, like hypersympathetic activity generally leads to all those things we were talking about, like inflammation and chronic disease and
Mhm.
poor sleep and all of that. So this is just another, let's say, use case for grounding and how it can help you bring some balance to that stress response and activate vagal tone and parasympathetic activity. So you want to be able to rest and digest, right? If you're constantly in fight or flight, you're you're going to have all different kinds of health problems. So, and if not now, eventually.
Yes.
Yeah. So, and then I think this was another study, um, if I can't recall exactly. So, this was the Applewhite study. You familiar with that?
Yeah, Roger Applewhite. Yeah.
Yeah.
He
So
Go ahead.
go for it. No, go for it. Sounds like you got it.
Well, he just wanted to see how grounding basically affected the voltage induced on the body from the electrical equipment in a building. So he slept in a hotel room. He's surrounded by electric fields, electromagnetic fields, which induce a voltage on the body. And so what he did is he connected himself to the earth, and he saw the changes in voltages on his body. They went down very, very significantly in response to grounding.
Yeah.
So when we're surrounded by all of these electronics, these it creates these electric fields, these electromagnetic fields, and these induce a voltage on our body, which is a very unnatural voltage. And so what this does, it perturbs the electrical homeostasis in our body. And so if we've got all these electromagnetic fields and electric fields acting on us, then it's and, and I believe EMFs are considered a class 2B carcinogen. which
Really?
is potentially carcinogenic, and that's that's good enough for me. It's like
As I
so
got you saying that you're saying this as I have these Bluetooth headphones on.
yeah. But it, it it does show um, one of the main mechanisms of action that grounding is producing, and that's discharging the body to the same electrical potential of the earth. And so that's basically what he was showing there. By the body voltage going down to close to zero, that's showing your body discharging all of the induced electric fields.
Yeah. So that's that left bar, sort of the blue color. That's the baseline voltage when he was. I don't know if he was on the bed, but it's the baseline voltage pre-grounding, and then you can see the voltage drops, and this left breast, abdomen, left thigh, where those measurements are conducted. Pretty much in all three cases, the voltage drops to near zero once in contact with the bed pad. So
Yes.
yeah, very cool stuff. Oh, and let's see. 60, it was in 60 hertz mode for the bed pad.
Mhm.
Not sure the specifics of what that means, but and then also found this study effect on white blood cell counts and pain perception in delayed onset muscle soreness. So that's pretty interesting. Anyone that lifts consistently is familiar with DOMS. It's delayed onset muscle soreness. It's a buildup of calcium in the muscle tissues, essentially, and over a period of days, you have this increasing soreness. Eventually gets better, but um, yeah. So study. You were going to say?
Oh yeah, I mean, as prior to this, there hasn't been anything to speed that process up. Delayed onset muscle soreness. There hasn't been. I mean, there are things that can make you feel better. Massage, hydrotherapy, um,
And working out too.
yeah, and moving moving around,
Yeah,
that speeds it up. Well, it doesn't. So nothing.
I think it reduces the pain perception, not
Right.
necessarily right. Yeah,
What I'm getting at is that nothing reduces the damage that exercise creates in the body.
right.
And so my whole theory with that is that when we train insulated, we're doing a lot more damage than what's necessary. We're doing a lot more damage than that needs to be done. Um,
Yeah. Talk
so
about like going to failure, for example, when you're lifting.
yeah.
Right.
Well, when you train grounded, your body isn't breaking down as much, and that's shown in blood urea, and that's the reduced white blood cell counts. There's not as much need for those white blood cells to be around, which tells us that the body, from the blood urea, that protein isn't being broken down as much in the body.
Right.
The reduced white blood cell counts just tells us that they're not needed. The inflammatory markers from grounded training aren't as um, excessive as they are in insulated training.
Right, right. And you can see here, I think there's a sharp increase in the white blood cell count uh, with the placebo group versus the grounded group. There's actually a slight decrease in white blood cells. So typically, white blood cell counts go up when, if you're sick or there's an infection, it indicates an elevated immune response for whatever the reason is. So you can see here with the placebo group, there's a huge spike, like 15% increase in white blood cells activity or count versus the grounded group. It pretty much stays flat and goes down to a degree. And then similarly on the right, you can see the pain scale or pain. I think that would be pain perception, right? Pain
Yeah.
scale. Um, since there's no way to tell how much pain somebody's actually in other than asking them. So,
Yeah. Right.
and similarly, with the placebo group, you get like there's 100%. It peaks at 160% change in the pain scale versus the grounding group. They peak out around, let's say 85 to 90 or so. So very potent effect there.
That's
Both, I mean, the white blood cell is like that's a hard laboratory marker. So it's, what would you call it? Empirical, but also the pain scale aspect as well. Even subjectively, these people who are experiencing the muscle soreness, the reported pain scale of the people that were grounded was half that of the non-grounded group. So, yeah, it's really interesting stuff, and you can see. I mean, like you mentioned about blood urea, but there's also a number of different ways when conducting these studies to tell that there's a real physiologic and biochemical difference in terms of what's going on in the body. So, yeah, so we dig the science. I think a lot of the studies that the groups are generally pretty small, right? Like maybe like how many, like 20 people, 30 people.
yeah, a lot. A lot of these studies aren't they're not very big studies. Conducting research, you need a lot of money, and
Right.
unfortunately, there's not a lot of money to be made by telling people to go be barefoot because it's free. Like nobody's gonna make any money from that. So like
No.
nobody's gonna pour money into research where you can't make money from it. You can't make
You
money.
can't, yeah.
Yeah,
You can't patent walking on the ground, yeah.
you cannot. You cannot.
So since we were talking about blood markers and EEG and different methods of, let's say, testing the response, have you ever done any testing on yourself?
Well, I don't have the greatest resources to do
Sure.
those kinds of measurements on
You
myself.
can't do brain scans at home.
I cannot,
No.
surprisingly, but
Yeah.
I have noticed some changes in my HRV uh, since I started grounding in milliseconds. So, and that's extremely subjective too with heart rate variability. Everybody's different,
Right.
so it's important to
You mean
monitor.
inter individual, basically, right?
Right. And so, don't compare your HRV to anybody else's because that's extremely subjective. But I have noticed a change in my HRV as I sleep and throughout the day, as I include more grounding in my day.
What do you use to track that?
My Apple Watch tracks my HRV, and so it's been tracking that for the past 3 years now. So I've got a lot of nice little charts on my phone that look at that. So
Nice. Yeah, it's good to build that longitudinal data.
mhm.
Um, so when you started grounding, like what would you say were the main what are the main benefits you get from it?
Mhm.
Like in terms of, we talked about like the mechanisms and things like pain perception and reduced oxidative stress. But for you personally, what do you say is the greatest benefit?
Well, all these processes are going to start as soon as you're grounded. So obviously, the longer you're grounded, the better. A lot of these studies that are done, they range from 20 minutes to 2 hours to an entire night of sleep. So, but I think it's just important to keep in mind that these these benefits, and there's a lot we haven't even we hardly scratched the surface of all the benefits that grounding creates or produces for the body. We haven't really gone into a lot of those, but those start happening as soon as you're grounded on the earth. Um,
Hmm.
and so and a lot of that depends on what kind of state you're in too. If you're someone that's been dealing with a lot of chronic issues, a lot of chronic pain, conditions, it's going to take a little bit longer for you to start to see those benefits, but you will see them. I think most people can tell right away from being
Right.
grounded. Like, oh, something feels different. Like something like I feel good. I feel relaxed.
Lighter.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It's a very peculiar, unique feeling that um everybody should, you know, just try it and see how it makes you feel.
Yeah.
Spend a few minutes grounded before bed and see how much better your sleep gets. Spend $30, get a grounding mat, put it underneath your pillow and see how it affects your sleep. There's there's a plethora of ways that it can enhance your life. And that's the big reason I started the Grounded Athlete. I lost a lot of loved ones to these chronic inflammatory diseases that I wish I had known about grounding earlier, so I could be telling them, hey, there's something that you don't have to pay any money for, and it will 100% help. It may not cure you, but it'll help. And that should be good enough for anybody. That should be good enough for anybody to be spending a couple minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes outside barefoot. Not even outside. They make it super easy. You can buy a mat. You can just sit on it.
Yeah. You could just do what I do is I'm too lazy to put on my shoes when I take out the trash. So I just walk out barefoot.
Exactly. Right.
Yeah. So, and I think one thing you didn't mention is grounded sandals, right? You want to talk about those?
Yeah, I make grounded sandals. They're made with copper, made with silver. The only sandals in the world made with copper and silver. They, well, what do you want me to talk about specifically? Like how they work, or like how they're made, or
both?
Yeah. So
you make them yourself?
I do. I've made close to 2,000 pairs of these things. And I'm starting to feel the effects in my hands. So
Good.
I need to pick up an apprentice or something. But yeah, so the sandals ground you via copper on the bottom, and that's connected to a silver conductive thread that's rated at 10 ohms per centimeter. Ohms is a measure of electrical resistance, and silver is the best conductor in the world. So that silver thread is it's sewn into your strap, and that wraps around your foot. And so you've got two very, very potent conductors grounding you with this sandal. You've also got a leather footbed that when you sweat in it, that's also going to enhance the conductivity of the sandal. So it's kind of it's a two method mechanism for being grounded, because your leather footbed, that's in contact with the copper on the ground, but the strap is also in contact with the copper on the ground. And so it's
the thread that goes through the strap, right?
Right. Yep.
Yeah.
And they're 11 millimeters thickness, stack height. So they're not super super thick for people that like a lot of cushion in your shoes. They're meant to be minimalist. With the sandals too, I don't recommend wearing them every day to start. There's a big barefoot movement going on right now, which I'm all for. But there are some.
It's not always practical, let's say.
Right, and there are some precautions that people need to take as far as wearing these barefoot shoes, because you have to think we live in contact with a lot of these unnatural surfaces. The body isn't meant to be in contact with these really hard flat surfaces all day every day, and that's pretty much all we touch. And so to wear these really, really minimalist shoes every day in contact with these surfaces, that's where I kind of start to stray away from the barefoot shoe community a little bit. And I've written a blog post about this too, but you kind of gotta wean yourself into it.
Is that when you say barefoot shoe, it's the ones with like the individual toes, or
no, just flatter, more minimalist shoes is what I'm trying to say.
Right. So that would be these kinds of things.
Right. Yeah. And I think these people, they need to, they're doing a lot of people a disservice by not telling them that these flat, hard surfaces, they're not natural for the human foot. And it can lead to a lot of injuries. And so that's why you have to go slow with it and you have to wean yourself into it. And I make that known on my website. But a lot of these companies are just like, hey, wear my product and everything's going to get better. Your foot's going to get stronger. And
yeah, I will say I bought a pair of sort of that type of shoe. It was probably a bit more like this one over here than the web toes, but and I wore it in my apartment building, and like doing errands, and I would go out wearing them sometimes. And it was a closed shoe, very thin patch for the bottom, so you could feel everything through the shoe in terms of the ground. But again, like it's kind of like what you're saying, not a lot of foot support on those hard flat surfaces, and it actually felt much more unnatural than like just going barefoot, because yeah, like you said, it's hard flat surface, and it's like hard flat meaning hard flat, and you also don't have any support on your ankle, so I got used to it, but it was still kind of weird.
Yeah, it's a tricky situation, because we have these very hard, flat, unnatural surfaces. So in order to compensate for that, it's almost kind of like we have to wear some cushion on them.
Right.
And when we wear the cushion, that leads to our feet getting weaker. And so it's just kind of this really, it's kind of a pickle that we put ourselves in. And I don't see us moving away from
No.
hardwood floors or anything like that anytime soon.
No.
So a little bit of cushion is probably optimal for the situation we find ourselves in. So
Right.
I
But
think
it sounds like the Sandals are a nice middle ground.
right. And
Yeah.
I always tell people, just be barefoot. Like you don't need to wear the sandals. That's what I just want people to be barefoot outside. And the sandals were meant, if you're on some kind of rocky terrain, or it's just not really practical to be barefoot
Right.
in a certain area.
Yeah.
That's when I like people to wear the sandals. But
Yeah.
it's just it's a tricky situation with the surfaces.
But like, yeah, but like on concrete, on like soft grass, like that's great for barefoot.
Yeah. And speaking of concrete, how do you know when you're grounded? I think that's an important question too, that I think we should have clarified earlier. How do you know if you're grounded or not? So
Right.
you'll know if you're grounded if whatever you're standing on is a conductor or an insulator. And so it's pretty easy to find out if what you're standing on is a conductor or insulator. So if it's a conductor, it conducts electrons or electricity more easily than an insulator. And so your conducting surfaces are going to be concrete, soil, grass, sand that's somewhat close to a body of water. Really dry areas tend to be very insulating. But asphalt, wood, glass, plastic, rubbers, those are all going to be very insulating. They're not going to ground you, which is a big reason that
So not your driveway.
yeah.
Right.
Asphalt is a petroleum based polymer, I believe, which is very insulating. But
tires too.
yes, and shoes. I guess we didn't even mention that either. Shoes insulate you from the earth, and
Right.
that's and there's in a lot of these studies about grounding, there's some interesting conclusions that they've made. And talking about grounding it can be difficult sometimes, because it comes off as kind of woo woo,
Right.
telling people to go be barefoot and stuff. But like, I do my absolute best to give them a mechanistic action that's happening when you're grounded, and I think I do a pretty decent job with that. But still, I think it's kind of
It has a reputation for
right.
being like undeservedly. It has a reputation for being woo woo. Yeah.
Right. And I think there's a lot of people in this very niche space that kind of make it woo woo too.
Right.
There's there's a lot of people that talk about grounding that don't know the exact mechanisms that are happening that are making it sound very woo woo, and
Right.
so
Right.
that's
Connecting with the earth. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
I mean,
and
hey,
it's
it works and for a reason. So, but
right,
yeah, if you don't
right.
talk about those reasons, it starts to sound magical.
Right, right, and there, I think there are a few people, good people out there that know the science of grounding and the biophysics involved and the biochemistry involved. But you got to know those things if you're because people are very data driven these days. They like numbers, they like facts, they like statistics, and so you've got to if you want to preach this stuff, you've got to know the information. And that's what I try and make the grounded athlete all about. I know it's a lot of the stuff that I put out can be very, I don't what's sciencey. But that's, I think ultimately to get this message out there, that's what it has to be. Like
Right.
I can't be taking the super hippie-ish approach that, most other brands do. Because that doesn't convert people.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
but
If you're into that, if you're into it for that sort of reason, you know, you're already predisposed to that type of thinking. Yeah.
and I have oh, quiet Siri. Um, and I've been studying this stuff for gosh, like 5 years now, and there's so much involved. There's so much
Mhm.
involved with it. You have to know your physics. You have to know your chemistry. You have to know your geology. You have to know your bio. You have to bring it all together. You have to know your biophysics. And a lot of what I know, I pulled from some really, really great minds. Gerald Pollack, James Oshman, so Cal family. Clint Ober he's a pretty good pioneer for grounding. He's helped get a lot of studies initiated and done. But yeah, and what I'm working on now is a small book that kind of puts all of this together in a digestible, coherent kind of manner. And
Mhm.
hopefully I can get that out in the next 6 months here. But because when you're navigating through all that research, it can get kind of crazy and hectic. And so my goal with writing this book is to make it accessible and easily navigatable, and hopefully it can help a lot of people. That's why I'm writing it, and so that's what I've been spending a lot of my time doing.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea because yeah, like a lot of people, I wouldn't say they may not have the time, or just a lot of people, going on PubMed's not really
Yeah.
something that that they'll either have interest in doing, or I mean, you got to
Mhm.
sit down and learn how to read a study first of
Yeah.
all, which takes a while. So
Mhm. Yep. There's and before I make all these videos and everything that I put out, it takes a long time. It takes a long time to make sure this stuff like is factually sound. I don't like to put out anything that isn't peer reviewed in the academic literature. So um, you guys can trust like what I'm putting out is good stuff, and I've put a lot of time and effort into making it coherent because ultimately all of this just comes down to helping people. I just want to help people with this science, and so I don't want to put anything that's has a lot of is problematic, because that's just going to hurt people. So
right. I did have one more question. So obviously with grounding, like that's a great solution for insulation is a great defense against electrical outbursts, lightning, etc. uh what do you think people need to take into account when they're grounding for like safety purposes, if anything?
obviously use common sense. don't don't be around exposed wires. And being outside barefoot, there there is that possibility, there's a lightning strike or something like that.
Very
But
unlikely. Yeah.
yeah, very unlikely. But the thing with that is that you're already on the ground. Uh, Electricity wants to get to the ground. If you're already on the ground, the odds of it using you as a path to get to the ground are very, very, very low.
Right.
But just use common sense. Don't expose yourself to. Don't get close to any power lines or anything. It's you know it sucks that I have to say that stuff, but just be careful and don't be in a wide open area and there's a thunderstorm or anything, and be
Right.
barefoot on the earth, because insulation does have some protective effects with those
Right.
kinds of with those kinds of things, but
Yeah.
yeah, just use common sense.
Yeah, basically just don't walk around any exposed wiring.
Yeah.
Be careful in an open field. I think that should just about cover it. Oh, and don't ground if you're in the bathtub.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, gosh. Please.
Yeah.
Please.
So it's on record. We've said it. So
Yeah.
don't do it.
Yeah.
Cool. So besides the book, anything else going on?
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to get a lot more videos put out. I've got another video on grounding and thyroid function that I'm going
Love
to
it.
have out in the next month here. Grounding and your response to vaccine. I know that can be kind of a touchy
Very
subject right now.
controversial.
Yeah, and so if you notice, like the stuff that I put out, I've been putting like inoculation.
Didn't you hear they're declaring a pandemic amnesty now? So
Oh yeah, I did hear about that. The book is called Earth and Water, and
yeah.
that's basically everything grounding, and also a lot of things dealing with water, because water has been equally one of my obsessive subjects these past few years. So, I mean, we didn't really talk about it earlier, but water tends to form these coherent domains when they're in contact with hydrophilic surfaces like proteins. You can call them, exclusion zones or structured water or all that. But
Man,
it's
you got to
this,
break that. You got to break that down a little bit.
yeah. So
Yeah.
going back to what we talked about earlier, proteins are semiconductors. And the reason, so let's back up a little bit more. So proteins are hydrophilic. And so
They like water. Yep.
Yep. So when water comes into contact with these hydrophilic surfaces in the body, they will create what's called these little exclusion zones. And they're basically these low entropy, ordered, structured, kind of the coherence zones that create this battery. So you've got positive charge, and so you can think of like this, like a protein backbone here, the water next to it, the water exclusion zone. What you essentially have is you have a flow of electrons and protons, and this creates a battery. And so, you can call this battery whatever you want to call it, the, spirit, chi. There's a lot of different names for it, but it is a battery. And one of the ways you can charge this battery is through grounding, because grounding means electrons going into the body. This exclusion zone is negative charge. And so the more you can build that negative charge, the stronger you're going to make this battery. And there are multiple ways to charge this battery. Yeah, exactly. And that tube actually is so I have a lot of ideas that don't really go along with mainstream science right now, and even this whole what you're looking at now, that's not something that's accepted by a lot of the scientific community. And so you've got your hydrophilic backbone there, a protein
On the left. Yep.
Yep. And then you've got a little zone next to it called that's the exclusion zone, and so you have negative charge in there.
Yeah.
And so you've got this battery going on that you can see, positive charge on one side, negative charge on the other side. And
Right.
so that battery forms the basis of a lot of energy that can be used in the body to do whatever you need it to do, create ATP. And even right there, you see that cylinder. So what tends to happen in a situation like that is you have capillary action. And so um, it's theorized with that specific illustration that the heart isn't the actual main generator of blood flow.
Uh-huh.
It's these exclusion zones, and these exclusion zones can be built through a plethora of different ways. One of them is through grounding, and one of them is through light, particularly in the infrared radiation
It
zone.
would make sense to a degree, right? You're saying this is not settled and controversial, but it would make sense to a degree because, as you said, with grounding, it increases heart rate variability. So,
Yeah, and I think that's one of the mechanisms that it's also improving blood. There's different mechanisms that are happening with the blood flow, like zeta potential. If so, that the capillary action that's going on in that little tube there, let's let's imagine that tube's a capillary, and
right.
that's driving blood flow. If that's true, and these exclusion zones are actually the main drivers of blood flow, that turns cardiology on its head. You
Mm,
know, so something like this, it's not going to be received well
no,
by the medical community.
I
Yeah,
mean, if this were true, it'd probably take another 30 to 40 years
yeah,
to get
absolutely.
there. Yeah.
But it has been shown multiple times that water does act very in a very peculiar fashion when it's next to these proteins, and it can potentially help with a lot of things like protein folding, which is huge.
Right.
And it's when proteins don't fold that a lot of problems happen.
Right.
So, but yeah, these exclusion zones in conjunction with hydrophilic surfaces create a battery um, in the body, and that can be used for a plethora of different ways as far as utilizing energy. That's electrical energy that can be utilized. So yeah, that is your matrix. And I've made a video about this in the past, but your bodily matrix is basically a conjunction of hydrophilic proteins and coherent water or structured water. And
Hmm.
one of the ways you charge this battery is through grounding. That's one of the main ways you can charge it.
If you wanted to get woo woo, you could talk about uh, how gratitude can help restructure your water matrix. Let's say.
Yeah, yeah, and there's yeah, there's some interesting science out there that even that shows the thoughts that you have can structure this water. And I think what you're referring to is that they would play music. They would play like is that what you're talking about?
Well, music and like labels with certain words on them.
So what I'm thinking of is gosh, I forgot his name, but he would play. They would play certain types of music, like they would play classical music, they would play hip hop music,
Love
and
that.
these water crystals would structure themselves differently in response to these different types of music. And so like
Yeah.
with like classical music, it'd be this very elegant symmetrical structure, and then they'd play something like death metal, and it'd just be like this very deformed shape uh, water crystal.
You
And
know what's
so,
interesting about that? There's this brand of water called, it's going a bit off subject, but there's a brand of water called, I think it's like what is it, like Death Water or something? You know what I'm talking about?
doesn't sound like
Uh,
something I want to drink though.
yeah, right. What is it? Death Water or Liquid Death? That's it.
Okay.
Yeah. And I actually, it tastes great.
Uh-huh.
It's a really good. They do a really good sparkling water drink, but I actually stopped drinking it because of this specific reason. Because
Ooh.
I was concerned about what it might do in terms of water, water structuring and
Huh.
etc.
It's odd. Yeah, I've never heard of it before.
It's very popular. It's taking off. They have like a partnership with Martha Stewart now. So
Oh,
anyway,
they're gonna blow up.
yeah. How about this? Because we could go on forever about uh, you know water's
Water.
interactions with the body.
Yeah.
Um, so what's the main benefit of charging that hypothetical battery with the water?
Main benefits. Well,
Use cases, what have you. So
it's
it improves heart rate variability,
well, those
capillary
are
action.
those are benefits of well, that first one was a benefit of grounding, but
Right.
the capillary action, um, well, your body now has um, a source of energy that can be utilized between this battery that can be utilized for anything that needs energy. Electromagnetic energy is energy that can be utilized. So if you're increasing that battery, then your body has more energy to pull from that.
Already talked about what you were up to. So you talked about the book. Um, so what other projects are you working on, or other things you may want people to know about?
Um, Earth and Water is the big one that I'm working on right now. The book. I've got a lot of cool videos that I'm working on right now, specifically that involve thyroid function and immune function in response to grounding. Um, I've got my Aries side projects going on, which hopefully will be done in the next 4 or 5 months here. That's kind of a surprise, so I'm excited to get that out to people. And a lot of people already follow the page for Aries, so there's been a lot of hype with that, and I think it'll live
What's
up to
that page called?
Aries Groundwear is what it's called. So I don't link it anywhere on my main page, so people just kind of have to find it, seek it out, or if I post it every once in a while. Um, but those are the main things that I've been working on. I'm pretty active on Instagram. Instagram's probably my main engagement tool.
Yeah,
Um, I on my Instagram I've got a
that's
crap ton.
the grounded athlete.
The grounded athlete. Yep. I've got a crap ton of resources and videos and illustrations that talk about grounding. The website has a ton of cool info. It's got a lot of research on there. Honestly, everything that you need to know about grounding is going to be on that website. And that's the grounded athlete, LLC.com. Or if you just Google search the grounded athlete, it'll be the first thing that pops up. Yeah, everything you need to know is on that website, and maybe some Easter eggs too, like some cool stuff on there.
You
Uh,
go check out if you go check out the, what is it, the staff list, you'll see some good stuff.
meet my team. Meet my team.
Yeah, exactly. Awesome. Well, I think we'll go ahead and wrap it up. But great conversation, and I'm definitely looking forward to doing it again. We've got more to cover. So
Yes, sir. There's a lot to talk about. So
awesome, my man. All right. Well, thanks for coming on, and we'll do this again soon.
all right, appreciate you inviting me. Talk to you soon.
All right.